This week, world leaders returned to New York for United Nations General Assembly Unga 76 session with the agenda of finding solution to COVID-19 vaccine distribution imbalance and climate change. The position of President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria and African leaders on the issue will engage our attention on this edition of the program. My name is Justin Bemunyana. Welcome you to Africa Weekly. Now, the Unga 76th session is in progress in New York, and key African leaders, including President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria, are making a strong case on the need for the world leaders to immediately find solution to COVID-19 vaccine imbalance and series of sideline engagements.
The Director General of the World Trade Organization, Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, briefed President Muhammadu Buhari on the serious reforms being implemented to get the organization back on track. She solicited the support of the president in this regard, especially on some of the negotiations relating to fisheries development, health, and in particular, the battle against COVID-19.
The fact that on the African continent, less than 4% of us have been vaccinated, whereas in the rich countries, close to 58% have been vaccinated, is not something that really is good for the world. Why? Because we have all these variants that are circulating. And if you don't vaccinate people, they'll just migrate from unvaccinated to the vaccinated. So what we're saying is, in order to solve this problem, we have to produce more vaccines, and then we have to distribute them equitably to parts of the world that don't have. And that's the narrative. At the WTO, what we're doing is actually working directly with the manufacturers. We're helping them monitor their supply chains, which are very complicated, to see what are the bottlenecks they have, what are the regulatory issues they face, how can we facilitate trade. In return, we're asking them to deconcentrate production on the African continent. We don't want to continue importing 99% of vaccines that we use. We're also looking at Nigeria. We're the largest country, and His Excellency Mr. President also wants to develop manufacturing. So we want to support that. We've been working with the Honorable Minister of Health to see what we can attract, the investment we can attract to Nigeria.
Inequity in access to the COVID-19 vaccines, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala emphasized, is not acceptable.
Vaccines are like a public good. So they also need investment from the government to match part of what the private sector is doing. We need demand. Vaccine producers will not produce unless they know that the vaccines are going to be purchased. And so, the fact if Nigeria can aggregate its demand, then that will help to persuade them to invest. And I think the Honorable Minister of Health is leading a task force of which I'm a member. The Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, is a member, Kia Adeshino, and Mohammed Pate. We're all trying to help from the outside to see how we can move things for investment.
The Director General is optimistic that within the next 2 to 3 years, the fruits of this labor will be reaped.
Joining us now to discuss the advocacy for COVID-19 vaccine equity by African leaders is the chairman of the House of Representatives Committee on Health, Dr. Yusuf Tanko Sununu. Well, Dr. Sununu, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, briefly, let's first look at your perspective on the issue of COVID-19 vaccination equity. What do you have to say about that?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important discussion on COVID vaccine equity. Well, before I say something, I think the best thing to describe or to differentiate is equality and equity. In equality, you are thinking of sharing equally. But when you think of equity, that means you are now talking about fair play, and you give people based on priority. For example, now, if you look at the equity of distribution of vaccine, it's supposed to be, let us look at which area has a weakest. First of all, you look at the magnitude of the disease itself. You look at where do we have the weakest infrastructure. You look at why do we have a lot of burden that we can use the vaccine to control. Now, if you look at worldwide, you know that Africa, as at now, the burden is not as much as Europe, America, and other part of the world. But one thing, if you look at the Africa, we have a very weak health system, a system that lacks much resiliency and cannot absorb shock. So it means while there is a priority, we also have much priority, thinking that the consequences may be more in Africa, though we don't pray. And therefore, priority should also be given to Africa because it lacks necessary infrastructure to cope with vaccine, with pandemic. It also lacks infrastructure to cope in terms of human resource for health, that it can also fight the COVID-19. It also has little effect to our economy, will be overblated and will increase the risk of having people that are malnourished, unemployed, and so many. And then lastly, if you also look at it, you find that African health system is the one that cannot absorb shock. And therefore, the best thing the world can do is prioritize distribution of the vaccine to Africa so that Africa will be protected.
Okay. Going by what you just said, let's have a closer look at the meeting ongoing at at New York now by the UN. President Buhari is a strong voice among world leaders. What impact do you think his advocacy for more vaccine for Africa will make at the UN General Assembly?
Well, the voice for the most populous black nation in the world, from its president, is very, very strong voice. And it cannot come at a better time than now. What President Buhari is calling for is already established in the ethical principle of medicine. In the ethical principle of medicine, we have justice. World, irrespective of what you do, you have to show justice. Justice here means that equally should be treated in such a way that you cannot lack access because you are black or because you are poor or because you are that. So also that there is also issue of not doing harm, non-malfeasance. It is harming the Africa not to allow us to have enough vaccine that our people can utilize and get protected, so that Africa can move towards achieving higher level of immunity that's in the society, thereby preventing and preventing people getting the disease or preventing those who got the disease to get severe form of the disease.
You've spoken so much about Africa as a continent, the need for more vaccines to be distributed on the continent, and of course the capacity of indigenous scientists and medical experts in that regard. Let's come home a little bit, Dr. Sununu. What is your impression on the vaccination strategies in the country, in Nigeria?
Well, the strategy is very, very well structured. For example, we do know that we can have a lot of fake material that can go around world over that has been circulated as vaccine. One of the strategies is that we must ensure that whatever vaccine we are given is potent. And that potency must be assured by regulated authority. That's why you have seen when the AstraZeneca arrived in Nigeria and when Moderna also arrived, the government did not go around and start distributing. No. It says NAFDAC, test run, make your detailed study, make your finding available so that you can accept that it's safe to Nigeria. Safety is very, very key. And when that was done, it was now allowed to go to general public. Two, it's such coded in such a way that outside the government structure, individual cannot just go out and import the vaccine into the country. This is very vital to avoid unwholesome vaccines coming into the country. Three, when you look at the distribution, it's such structured that from the recipient of the vaccine, that's the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, it is such transmitted to the state Primary Healthcare Development Agency, who now move it down to the lowest level of the society that can receive it. Fourthly, there is a proper documentation of the vaccine with a dashboard and online that can capture every online data, and it can be followed timeline. And fifthly, we must also agree that despite the fact that there is limited amount of vaccine in the country, it is so structured that any vaccine that exceeded its lifespan, for example, if a vial is due to be given to 10 people, and then 8 people received, and then the lifespan of the remaining 2 doses that remain is expired, or for reason of say otherwise it cannot be safe to be administered. It's made in such a way that that remaining doses will be wasted and will not be administered.
Okay, that therefore means that from what you've said, the strategies are very much commendable.
It's very much commendable.
Okay.
But the only thing is that what we are trying to fight is the hesitancy of average Nigerians to go willingly and accept the vaccine. And this is not unconnected with so many conspiracy theory that are without any proof that have been circulated all over in our social media outlet. But awareness has increased, and all those that have been shared in the general public in the platform of social media, people try to demonstrate it among those people of Nigerian origin that have received the vaccine, and they found that really it wasn't correct.
No, I thank you so much for your time, finding time to come here to clear the air on Buhari's advocacy for COVID-19 vaccine equity for Africa at the UN General Assembly. Thank you so much, the Chairman, House of Representatives Committee on Health. Thank you once again for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Now, the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, has made a presentation to the sideline event of the Unga 76 on SDGs attainment in Africa, saying many African countries are on course.
In a recorded video address to a side meeting on SDGs convened by the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres at the ongoing 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, President Kenyatta said Kenya would not lose sight of the subject. The head of state noting that despite the socio-economic challenges occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, Kenya has made progress in education, gender and climate change, among other SDG sectors.
I want today to reaffirm Kenya's commitment to the SDGs and to ensuring that we maintain the implementation momentum that we started with. Kenya developed a country SDG roadmap in the year 2016, which was then integrated with our national development agenda through our medium-term plan.
He said 2 voluntary reporting assessments undertaken by Kenya had returned positive results, adding that the country's 2016 SDG roadmap had been fully integrated into the national development agenda.
My administration has sharpened the economic policy by prioritizing action in sectors with the greatest multiplier effect on the economy, these being namely affordable housing, manufacturing, universal health coverage, and food security and nutrition.
The head of state pointed out that Kenya's push towards attaining food and nutrition security was being held by climate change, among other salient factors.
On other SDGs, it remains work in progress. Under SDG 2, which aims to end hunger and achieve food security, we face headwinds because of the vagrancies of weather triggered by climate change.
On housing, the president said Kenya had taken steps to promote sustainable cities and human settlements by implementing affordable housing programs so as to end the expansion of informal settlements.
Kenya has undertaken measures to promote sustainable cities and human settlements and undertaken major housing and infrastructure upgrades to reduce the expansion of informal settlements as well as urban slums.
In his address, Antonio Guterres said challenges facing the world such as climate change, conflicts and COVID-19 had slowed down global efforts towards the attainment of SDGs.
Africa Weekly returns shortly with the Tidbit segment. Now, climate change is one of the main issues for discussion at the Unga 76. President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria is pledging his country's commitment to positive biodiversity activities for the good of the planet.
On the sidelines of the United Nations 76th General Assembly, world leaders are committing to positive actions for the conservation of biological diversity to protect nature and the planet. President Muhammadu Buhari said Nigeria has increased its national parks, designated additional biosphere reserves, and placed other programs and policies in support of biodiversity preservation in the country.
On our part, our commitment to tackle and reverse the severe trend of biodiversity loss remains unwavering, as anchored on the following: regional and inter-regional cooperation, which we are currently championing, as well as creation of marine protected areas pursuant to the 30 by 30 agenda of the Convention on Biodiversity, domestication of relevant international agreements, conventions, as well as laws and policies for the protection and conservation of biodiversity.
The European Union pledged to double funding for biodiversity conservation in the most vulnerable countries of the world.
This will support an ambitious and more effective new global biodiversity framework. We want to work with our international friends on a new generation of green alliances and partnerships. We aim to jointly step up our climate and biodiversity commitments across the globe.
Conversation on the dialogue continues with focus on improved financing for biological diversity.
How can the world assist African countries and the rest of the developing world to cover lost grounds in education occasioned by COVID-19? This next report captures that.
Education was one of the sectors most hit by the coronavirus pandemic. Schools had to shut down while children remained at home for a lengthy period of time. Schools that could afford e-learning went on to adopt the system to keep their students engaged during the pandemic. But students whose schools do not have the resources were disadvantaged. What the third plenary of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly came up with is how to achieve quality education in the post-COVID-19 era using latest technology. African leaders at the summit welcome plans to digitalize education using modern technologies. Realizing it in developing world, they say, may be tasking, but optimistic it is achievable.
Disruption to the education systems, particularly in developing countries, was in part due to inadequate information, communication, and technology, ICT facilities.
A further voluntary reallocation of new SDRs to countries that need them most will help create the physical space required for a faster and more equitable recovery.
Interdependent and globalized world, cooperation, strategic collaboration, and good governance are a must.
The 76th session examined girls' education and women empowerment in the era of digital technologies, bearing in mind the long-term implication of an unequal access to education during COVID-19, opportunities and challenges of remote learning, and an overview of global access to the digital technologies, resources, and disparities.
And that's our package this week. And on behalf of the entire production team, I thank you for being a part of it. My name is Justin Bemunyi.